Hello and welcome fellow motorsports fans. Once again we had an action-packed single-seater race weekend behind us with a championship decider, proper F1 racing finally back, and most importantly of all, Americans' new generation of open-wheel drivers dueling it out across 3 different series, and as always I'm here to tell you all about it, so let's get right into it. We begin in the Saudi F4, which since we last talked about it had 9 different races across 3 rounds, all in Jeddah and all within 2 weeks, so a bit of an odd schedule, but to be honest this fits the Saudi F4 with its slightly odd approach all around. But to be honest, I've grown to really like the series over the season. Yes, the grid wasn't the 20 cars they were talking about before the season, that turned out to be a straight up lie. But nonetheless, the actual quality of drivers was pretty good. Yes, Federico Rifai was the guy who ended up winning the championship, and to be honest, ever since the first round it was between him and Andrej Petrovic. It was really only those two. Obviously, going off the trophy round, we would have expected Oscar Wurz to be straight in there, maybe Zanfari as well, but they really weren't. Both of them were thoroughly underwhelming across the full season, I have to say. I really expected a lot more, but they just couldn't string together like consistently good performances. In the end, yes, as I said, Rifai ended up winning the title, but for my money, Petrovic is actually the best looking driver in this. He also finished the series in style, winning the last race on the road against Rifai. In general, he finished ahead of him a lot this season, and I think it's more down to the few really bad results that cost Petrovic here, and obviously the slightly slower start. But in general, this is really a guy to keep an eye on, and I am excited to see where his full season campaign takes him. I really hope he sticks around in single seaters. The other guy that's really, grown up over the course of the season, it felt like, is Kutskov, the reigning OK karting world champion. And, he had a slow start. It took him a little to warm up to the car, a lot longer than Petrovic, I have to say. But by the end of the season, he got a win or two. I'm not entirely sure. Those 9 races really just blended into one in my brain, I'm not going to lie. But his average performance has stepped up considerably to the point where he was at least a clear-cut 3rd best on average, I'd say. And then last but not least, for the series as a whole, we have to talk about the local talent, which I don't want to underestimate because, yeah, I didn't know any of these drivers, aside from the Alkubaisi sisters. But Yeany, Al-Mushoji, and to a lesser extent Al-Kabani all really impressed throughout different stages of the season. Yes, they are probably more familiar with the track than the Europeans competing, but nonetheless, this shows that, yeah, there's merit in this series, not just to give a cheaper winter opportunity for the Europeans, but also to actually help the local talent grow, and it's really nice to see. And let's wait and see if some of them rock up in Europe. But for now, let's move over to the United States, to the land of freedom and young racing drivers apparently. We begin with the slowest of the classes, and the only one we haven't talked about so far because it was actually the first round of the season for the USF Juniors. And I have to say, the guy to beat so far was Sebastian Wheldon. He was quite hyped coming into this, as far as I know. He won I believe the Skip Barber series. I'm not entirely sure, nothing I watched personally, but I did hear about him quite a lot across last year, so he was a guy people were already worried about basically, and yeah, he delivered by just winning on debut. Very nice work there. He also won race 3, so in general, yeah, definitely the guy to beat across the weekend, although he did have stiff competition from Liam McNeely, one of the GB4 graduates. We talked about it last week, where GB4 feeds into the ladder and everything, and it turns out, well, it is a very low-level series, that's for sure. Apparently even on the American level, people opt to jump to the lowest rung of the ladder instead of going to like USF 2000s, so fair enough. But at least it shows, yeah, Liam McNeely was one of those front-running guys in last year's GB4, and he continued this trend here in the USF Juniors, and he was on the pace and doing really well and won the 2nd race, so fair enough. One of the other guys that will be in the championship fight. Max Taylor, another one, we'll talk about him a little in the USF 2000s because he did a double program, but he was a consistent frontrunner as well. And then last but not least, Ariel Elkin, who you may or may not be familiar with already. Also, not quite fighting for wins basically. It never felt like he was really threatening to take the win, even if he was leading a few laps, but definitely a frontrunner, no doubt about it. There's two more storylines I am keeping an eye on for this particular series. One is what the Brazilian F4 graduates do, namely champion Tessaro, but also Ribeiro. And so far, I have to say, both very solid, clearly have already experience in cars like this, and they made good use of it, immediately fighting in the top 10. Tessaro in particular looks like a leading midfielder, and I'm sure he'll, increase his level a little bit and start fighting for podiums and wins in no time. Ribeiro, not so sure, but again, also consistently running in the top 10 for the most part, and clearly at least capable in this particular series. Last storyline to watch, a bit of a sad one, unfortunately, which is obviously I've got a thing for the female drivers to see if there's talent there and who we have to keep an eye on. And Ava Dobson was, reasonably high up on my list, at least when it comes to the American side of things. I thought she did pretty well in her couple appearances in F4 USA last season. So naturally, I hope that her full season program this time around would work out quite well for her. And I mean, it might still, but she was straight up backmarking really at best, like in the lower midfield, basically fighting around P15-ish in the not super large grid. So unfortunately, I was hoping to tell you all about how you should keep an eye out for her, but at the moment, probably not so relevant. But anyway, I'll monitor the situation and keep you guys updated. Let's move on to USF 2000. In the USF 2000s, we have the first of these guys, if Sebastian Wheldon didn't convince you already, who we really have to keep an eye out for because he will be a name in US single-seater racing in the next couple of years. Max Garcia, obviously the man to beat already in St. Petersburg, and he continued his form here, immediately taking the first win. Yes, he didn't win any of the other two races, unfortunately, but he clearly is the guy to beat this season. In the other races, it was actually the guy I mentioned earlier, Max Taylor, and also Nico Christodoulou in the VRDs that actually looked to have the best pace of the pack. Unfortunately, a spin from Max Taylor and a really unfortunate situation for Christodoulou in that moment cost them both a chance of the win in race 2. They both dropped back because of Maxi Taylor's spin. I'll show it to you here. Nonetheless, yeah, they had the fastest car and they made the most of it in the third race by actually getting the 1-2 for the team, with Christodoulou taking his first win in the category. So very nice work all around, and it did throw off Mr. Garcia a little bit. Nonetheless, over the full season, I don't know if they can sustain this. We'll keep an eye on it. The guy who's just Mr. Consistent, and he definitely deserves this title, is Papasavage. Obviously coming in as a second-year guy in the series, you'd expect him to do really well, but bringing home 3 second places in 3 races is quite a nice achievement, to be honest. Certainly might end up fighting for the title just based on consistency. So far it doesn't look like, he didn't have that flash of brilliance, the dominant run or anything that made you think, oh, he really deserves a win anytime soon. It more felt like, oh, really, he got 3 P2s in this weekend. I barely noticed him. But yeah, that's not a bad thing. You barely noticed him because he was just there doing his job, banging out the laps and eventually, yeah, taking home all those key points that'll come in handy later down the year. Last but not least, we have to go on our rookie watch in the series. And first of all, we have Brienza. Talked about him after St. Petersburg for being, a little bit disappointing, costly mistakes and everything. And it looks like this time he has really just stabilized, comfortable top 5 runner in all the races as far as I remember. And just very solid drives all around. Not quite the front-running, race-winning kind of pace yet, but then again, that's not the expectation at all. I think this was really the weekend you want to see from a rookie just adjusting to the car and everything, so brilliant work there. Unfortunately for his direct competition, first of all Giaffone, the reigning USF Juniors champions, but also Michael Costello, who did really well in St. Petersburg, at least in terms of pace. Both of these just haven't quite clicked in that way yet. There's way too many mistakes. Again, they both lost crucial points. Costello, I think, barely finished the race in the top 10, even though he had the pace again. So yeah, they are not quite there yet. Brienza definitely stealing the show among the rookies. But there was also Hudson Schwartz, who I didn't have on my radar at all really, but he also just had some front-running pace in some of the races, more or less out of nowhere. He might end up in this Rookie of the Year conversation by the end of it, so we'll keep an eye out for him as well. Now, time for the big boys. If you like this sort of content and want to support me doing it every week, then please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. It would really help me a lot. Now, USF Pro 2000, the big show, the one with the most interesting name in American single-seater racing right now, for my money. Nikita Johnson, the guy who we'll see in Europe later in the year in GB3. And this weekend really was all about him and also Hunter Yeany, who we talked about after St. Petersburg, mainly because he did a really costly mistake and took out himself and two other drivers with one questionable move. And he made up for it this weekend by being a front runner. He actually got the win in race one, I want to say, and he was comfortably fighting for the others. Johnson actually ended up winning both the second and the third race, the third in particular in super dominant fashion. So once again showing that he really is the guy to keep an eye out here. 15-year-old, I want to just add it again. If you're not excited about him already, just keep the age in mind. So these two were the guys to beat, but they aren't the only front runners. Denmark actually got the second place in the third race, where Yeany just, for some reason, in race 1 and 2, there was a clear difference between Johnson, Yeany and the rest of the pack. In the third race, that order was a little shuffled, where it was Yeany sort of as a clear third best and Denmark actually the clear second quickest. But nonetheless, yeah, stellar performance across all three races from Yeany. The front-running pack was pretty consistent this weekend in general. Simon Sikes and Matt Clark, the other two rookies and USF 2000 graduates, sort of made up the rest of the top 5 across all the races really, and all look like very, very competent drivers that we will have to watch out for further. Now, this comes with the front runners from the first weekend were all a little bit absent, I have to say. It was very odd, like mostly Lockie Hughes. Obviously he won the first race in St. Petersburg last time out and actually was fighting for a podium in the other one, I want to say. I'm really bad at remembering things. You catch my drift. He was a very competitive driver in the first weekend, and this time he was just absent. He was fighting for around P10 in all the races, just didn't really have any ambition to go, well, not ambition, I'm sure the ambition wasn't a problem, but he didn't really have the ability to move forward. And then crucially, he also made very costly mistakes, which meant he ended up with 2 DNFs instead of did this like P9, P10 finish, which would have at least been nice points. So yeah, a very different order from the one we've watched during the first weekend, and certainly a thing we will have to monitor to see how this plays out. Nonetheless, this series is all about Nikita Johnson. Let's go to F1. Formula 1 at Suzuka, and oh boy, where do we even begin with this? The race started really strong with Ricciardo wiping out Albon, causing a red flag, clearly the biggest story of the weekend really, and one that's been discussed an awful lot on the social medias. Just my quick opinion here, I mean, if there's any discussion yet, that was just Ricciardo being a bit clumsy really. Clearly on him, if there's ever been any doubt about that. Very, very disappointing performance, and it does feel like maybe it is just the pressure getting to him now. And obviously it sounds odd because he's so experienced and should be used to driving under all kinds of pressure, but this looks like a repeat of McLaren Ricciardo, where it's seemingly getting worse every weekend now, and just this weird like snowball effect of bad press constantly. And might, you know, it feels like it gets to him. Maybe that's why he worked so well in the Red Bull, because that just wasn't the thing. He was always a praised glory child really, and yeah, now he is nowhere, and it is really sad to see. But if this continues, I doubt he makes it to the summer break, to be honest. He might have a De Vries kind of end to the year. I have to say though, for all the haters, and the internet opinions about this race were really mixed. For me personally, this has comfortably been the best race of the season, and actually just an all-around good F1 race, not just in the context of this particular season. Yes, the battle for P1 and P2 for that matter was decided after turn 1 basically, with the Red Bulls just dominating. And you know, that's classic F1 for you. Yeah, you will always have one team that's just nailed the regs and will drive off into the distance. That's the norm. It's great when something else happens, but this is kind of expected. The good thing though was the incredible battle for P3 and below. And it was both, yes, we had a fair bit of on-track racing, not the greatest on-track racing, I'm not delusional, lots of DRS passes, and most of the passes really only happened because of massive tyre differences, but nonetheless, a lot of on-track passing. It's what we want to see, right? My eyes don't really care whether or not someone's on much older tires than the other. It was still pleasant to watch. And then obviously from a, you know, sports fan perspective, crucially, the strategic battle was amazing to see. I don't know, 4 different strategies playing out in the top 10. Just mental scenes. Mercedes trying a one-stop and failing. Leclerc, out of all people, in the Ferrari pulling off a one-stop. Like, more or less it felt like he nailed the strategy, which, you know, given he's driving for Ferrari, that's a surprise in and of itself. Sainz absolutely stealing the show in the closing stages to charge that podium and everything. So for me, for my money, this was a very, very entertaining race. Let me know down in the comments what you thought about it. Are you that bothered by Verstappen winning? It's hard to get excited, because I do get that, and on some race weekends I feel like this, especially when the rest of the action isn't amazing. But yeah, when I can just watch Ferrari versus McLaren versus Mercedes versus Alonso for 90 minutes, I don't really care whether or not they're fighting for P1 or P3, even if obviously P1 will be preferred, no doubt about it. Last but not least, and once again the shout out, Yuki Tsunoda keeps, you know, moving towards his new role as the eternal fan favorite. Obviously in Japan, no discussion about it anyway, but overall, just by being best of the rest, really the only midfielder to score points consistently. And he did so again, brought it home in P10, while Ricciardo obviously fucked it on lap 1. So what a contrast we have there once again. I really wish we could see Tsunoda in a better car for once, or, well, not even a better car, in a different car, because I would really like to know how good our V-carb really is. I don't know if Tsunoda is all of a sudden really out driving the car, truth be told. I think he is really looking good because he's been going up against a struggling Ricciardo and a old struggling rookie Nick de Vries in the last 2 years. And maybe the car is actually back to the level it was on back when Gasly was driving it and was consistently fighting for like P5s. You know, that could be a thing. Maybe not quite as good, I don't believe that. But nonetheless, I really need to know, you feel me? Yeah, I don't know. It's a giant mystery, and I hope we can solve it soon. Anyway, that was a lot for this week. Next week there isn't that much single-seater racing though, in contrast, so I think it's fair that we went a little over time for this time around. Let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments as always, and otherwise I'll thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.